The night is cold. February in Worcestershire doesn't forgive you. It's the kind of cold that seeps through stone walls, the kind that makes the countryside feel emptier than it already is, the kind that makes you want to stay inside. Draw the curtains, pour something warm, and pretend the world outside doesn't exist. And most people on the Besford Court estate are doing exactly that. It's a Monday night. Nothing happens on Monday nights here. Nothing is supposed to happen on Monday nights here. This is a place where people come precisely because nothing happens. Stone walls, manicured hedges, a Tudor manor at the heart of the development that makes the whole postcode feel like a period drama. Expensive, quiet, safe. Except tonight. Tonight, somewhere past those hedges, past that manor, past the long dark lane that winds through the estate, woman is screaming. Not crying, not arguing, screaming. The kind of sound that your body recognizes before your brain does. The kind that pulls you upright out of your chair. The kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up even through walls. She is running in the dark, barefoot on frozen gravel, bleeding, already broken in ways she doesn't yet understand. She reaches a neighbor's window. She pounds on it with both fists. Open, please. Please open the door. Please, someone help me. Please. A light flickers on inside. Someone is moving toward the door. But it is February, and February in Worcestershire doesn't forgive you. And by the time that door opens, Harold Landry has already followed her outside. He has a knife, and he is not stopping. Her name was Lucy. She was 38 years old. She was a mother. She was a musician. She was a woman who had spent the last year fighting with everything she had just to take her children and start over. And this cold, dark, screaming February night is the last night of her life. To understand what happened on that gravel driveway, you have to go back. Not just to the marriage, not just to England. You have to go all the way back to Louisiana, to a big, loud, working-class Cajun family. Too many kids. Not enough of anything else. Harold Landry grew up understanding one thing at a cellular level. What it felt like to have nothing, and what it felt like to want more. More money, more space, more weight in a room when you walked into it. He channeled all of that hunger, every ounce of it, into work. The oil industry, specifically the design of cranes for offshore oil platforms. Not glamorous. Not the kind of work that gets written up in magazines. But in Louisiana in the 1970s and 80s, the oil industry was the engine of everything. And Harold ran that engine hard. By the time he was a known face around Covington, he was employing people, building things, making decisions that mattered. He had the house, the car, the handshake that closed deals. He was by every measurable standard a success story, 2 marriages, 4 children, a reputation as a generous man, sociable, the kind of man who picked up the check and made sure everyone knew he'd picked up the check. His longtime Louisiana lawyer, Pat Fanning, a man who genuinely liked Harold, who had known him for decades, described him as all of those things. And then Pat Fanning said something else, something quieter, something he seemed to choose carefully. He said Harold was an angry guy, that when Harold believed he was right, and Harold always believed he was right, he became immovable, not loud, not explosive, not always, just immovable, like a wall you could exhaust yourself against for hours and it would still be sting when you finally stopped. I want you to hold that, because that one detail, that unwillingness to ever be wrong, that absolute conviction that Harold's version of events was the only version that mattered, is the thread that runs through every single thing that happens in this story. Pull it, and the whole thing unravels. Before I take you to England, I need to take you to a traffic light. February 6, 1994. Harold is 47 years old. He has money. He has properties. He has a reputation. He has also been having an affair with a married woman. Her husband finds out. His name is Chris Price, and one afternoon, Chris Price tracks Harold down, finds him sitting at a red light in his car, gets out of his own vehicle, walks toward Harold's window. He wants to confront him. He wants answers. He wants to look the man in the eye. Now I want you to really sit with what happens next, because in the next 10 seconds, Harold Landry is going to show you exactly who he is. Before England, before Lucy, before all of it, Harold rolls down his window. He raises a .38 caliber handgun, and he points it directly at Chris Price, in front of witnesses, out loud, so that people standing nearby can hear him clearly. He says, "I'm going to shoot you." And then he pulls the trigger. Chris Price takes a bullet in the neck. This happens outside a hospital, in broad daylight, with witnesses on the street. Chris Price survives, barely. Harold is arrested, charged with attempted murder. And this is the part I need you to pay attention to, because this is where the story of Harold Landry really begins. His defense argues self-defense. The man who drew the weapon. The man who issued the verbal warning before firing. The man who was sitting safely inside a car. Self-defense. The charge is reduced from attempted murder down to aggravated battery. Conviction in October 1994. The sentence, probation. A $500 fine. Community service. Not a single night in prison. Harold Landry walks out of that Louisiana courtroom, gets into his car, drives home, and learns the most dangerous lesson of his life, that he can do something like this and walk away. That the rules that govern what happens to everyone else, do not apply to him in the same way. 5 years later, he opens a laptop, and nobody in England will know about Chris Price for another 17 years. The internet is young, unfiltered, a little bit lawless. Chat rooms are where people go at night when the house gets too quiet and the loneliness gets too loud. Harold Landry is 53 years old. He has his money and his properties and his Louisiana success story. He has also by now been divorced twice. His online handle is Kinjun H, a nod to his Cajun roots. A performance of identity, even in a chat room. Even anonymously, Harold is building a version of himself. And somewhere in that digital noise, in those late-night chat rooms full of strangers typing things they'd never say out loud, he finds her. Her handle is Misery. I have thought about that name more than almost anything else in this story. A 28-year-old Welsh woman sits down at a keyboard and names herself Misery. Not to be dramatic, not for attention, because Lucy Davies was the kind of woman who didn't perform feelings she didn't have. She was honest about her pain in a way that most people are too frightened to be. She was a music student, a Welsh woman who had made her life in England. A single mother already raising a young boy named James on her own. Neighbors and friends who knew her then, and who would speak about her later, after everything, described her as extraordinary, bright, funny, magnetic, the kind of person who fills a room just by entering it. One neighbor said she had an encyclopedic knowledge of classical music, the kind of depth that takes years to build. Years of devotion, years of love for something larger than yourself. She was alive in ways that are hard to describe without it sounding like eulogy, but it is a eulogy. And she deserved more than the one she got. She had a whole future mapped out in music, a degree she was working toward, a craft she had devoted herself to since she was a girl in Wales. The kind of talent that people around her recognized, and that she herself probably undersold, the way people who are genuinely gifted sometimes do. She was raising James on her own and doing it beautifully. The boy was loved, bright, cared for. Lucy was building something real on her own terms, with her own hands. And then Kinjun H appeared. She was also, at 28, alone, raising James by herself, figuring it out day by day. And Kinjun H appeared in her messages, and he was charming. He was funny. He had stories. He had presence, even through a screen. He was also 25 years older than her, but he flew to England. He showed up. And the romance moved the way romances move when one person is swept up and the other person is doing the sweeping. Fast. Too fast, in retrospect. But hindsight is a luxury Lucy didn't have. She fell pregnant. They married. And Harold made a decision that I want to talk about, because I think it reveals everything about his state of mind entering this chapter of his life. He didn't bring Lucy back to Louisiana. He left Louisiana entirely. He walked away from his oil empire, his community, his social world, his American life, and he followed Lucy to the English countryside. Why? Because Louisiana Harold had a history. Louisiana Harold had 2 failed marriages, a criminal conviction, and a reputation that certain people in Covington quietly knew about. But English Harold was whoever he decided to be, a self-made millionaire turned country gentleman. A man of substance and culture, new country, new identity, clean page. Nobody in England knew about Chris Price. Nobody knew about the traffic light. Nobody knew about the handgun. Nobody knew about the neck wound. Harold had left all of that behind in Louisiana like a snake shedding its skin. The Besford Court estate sits near Pershore in Worcestershire. Stone walls. Prestige. The kind of address that signals arrival. Their home is large and imposing. Cotswold stone, surrounded by grounds that stretch in every direction. The kind of house that ends up in estate agent brochures with phrases like gracious living and exceptional period features. Their daughter, Harriet, is born. James grows up under their roof. Harold throws himself into his new identity with the same ferocious energy he threw into everything. Dinners out, holidays abroad, the lifestyle. He dressed the part. He played the part. And for a while, maybe for longer than it should have lasted, it worked. By 2002, Harold's old Louisiana lawyer Pat Fanning ran into the couple while they were on holiday in Mexico. He said Lucy was vivid, attractive, clearly the center of Harold's world. Harold doted on her, gave her everything. In those early years, Fanning said, Harold was completely captivated. But estates like Besford Court have a problem. The houses are far apart enough that you can pretend not to hear things. And for a while, people did. Because nobody wants to be that neighbor. But after a few years, the pretending gets harder. Friends who knew the Landrys started describing the marriage in a very specific way. A volatile mixture of anger and alcohol. Arguments that started sharp and escalated into something harder. Harold drinking more. And more frequently. And a different Harold emerging when he drank. Not the generous man who picked up the check and told stories about Louisiana with a smile. Not the man who flew across the Atlantic for a woman. Not the man who walked away from everything to start fresh. Something colder. Something that the neighbors could hear through walls and, for a while, not to acknowledge. Because acknowledging it meant having a conversation that nobody on a prestigious English country estate wanted to be the one to start. Something that made people change the subject and find somewhere else to be. There's a dynamic in that house that I want you to understand, because it's easy to miss if you're only looking at the surface. The money in the Landry house flowed in one direction, Harold's direction. Lucy's entire life ran through Harold, the house she lived in. Harold's, the school fees for her children. Harold's, money. The holidays, the car, the food on the table, the lifestyle that looked so enviable from the outside. All of it required Harold. All of it depended on Harold. All of it could, in theory, be taken away by Harold. And I want to be very clear, that kind of financial dependency does not happen by accident in relationships like this one. It is not a side effect. It is the architecture. It is how control is built and maintained over years and years and years, so quietly, so gradually, that the person inside it often doesn't see the walls closing in until the day they try to walk through one. By 2009, 10 years into the marriage, Lucy made a decision, the bravest decision of her life. And, though she didn't know it, the most dangerous. She had reconnected with an old school friend on Facebook, a gentle, ordinary thing, a name she recognized from another life, clicking through to send a message. That friendship became something more, something real, something that reminded Lucy of who she was before she became Harold Landry's wife. She wanted a divorce. She wanted to take her children. She wanted to walk out of that beautiful stone house and build something of her own. I need to pause here, because what I'm about to tell you is not just a fact about this case. It is a fact about every case like this one. Researchers who study domestic violence, who have spent decades mapping the patterns, collecting the data, sitting with the survivors and the families of those who didn't survive, will tell you this with absolute consistencies. The moment a woman in a controlling relationship tells her partner she is leaving is the single most dangerous moment of the entire relationship. Not the years of arguments before, not the tension, not the walking on eggshells or the nights of silence or the slow erosion of the person she used to be. The moment she says, I am done. The moment she takes back her own agency. That is when the risk of catastrophic violence spikes. Harold's response to Lucy's decision was immediate. He told a neighbor, not Lucy, a neighbor, that he did not want Lucy to benefit from the divorce. He changed his will. He agreed to fund an apartment for Lucy while the separation played out, and then watched, barely concealing his fury, as she used that money to hire a powerful divorce lawyer. Every negotiation became a war. Over money, over property, over furniture, individual pieces of furniture. The prosecution would later say Harold wasn't just being difficult. He was trying to make sure Lucy walked away with nothing. Because to Harold, this wasn't a marriage ending. This was someone defying him. Someone walking away on their own terms. Someone winning. And Harold Landry. The man who had never been wrong. The man who had shot someone for crossing him and walked free. The man who had crossed an ocean to reinvent himself rather than reckon with himself. Could not process losing. They were still living under the same roof. Separate bedrooms. Two people moving around each other inside a house that had become something between a courtroom and a powder keg. Every morning, every meal, every passing in the hallway. A daily reminder of everything Harold was about to lose. The house, the image, the life he had built, the woman who had been the center of it, and it was eating him alive. February 1st, 2010. A Monday. I want you to be Lucy for a moment. Not the victim. Not the woman at the end of the story. The woman at the beginning of this particular day. You wake up in the separate bedroom. Not the master bedroom, the other one. The one you moved into when sharing a bed with him became unbearable. Your son James is 14 years old. Your daughter Harriet is 7. They are the reason you get up every morning. They are the reason you hired the lawyer. The reason you are fighting this battle, instead of disappearing quietly with whatever Harold was willing to throw at you. You are trying to get out of this house, and every day that you are still in it, still eating breakfast under the same roof, still passing him in the hallway, still sleeping 20 feet away from a man who is doing everything in his power to make sure you leave with nothing. Every day is its own small war. Somewhere during the afternoon, something breaks open inside Lucy. She goes to Facebook. She opens the text box. She types 7 words. I've never hated someone as much as I hate someone now. And she posts it. She doesn't hide it. She doesn't whisper it or bury it in her private messages. She posts it publicly. For everyone to see. For him to see. Because she is done swallowing her truth. Done performing calm. Done pretending. Less than an hour later, the argument begins. It starts of all things over furniture. Specific pieces that Lucy had asked to take when she finally moved out. A baker's rack. A kitchen table. Things, objects. But they weren't really about the objects, were they? They were about who was going to win. The fight escalates inside the house. Harold grabs for Lucy's phone. His instinct, when confronted, always to control the record, always to control the version of events. And the argument spills into the kitchen. What happens in that kitchen is the hinge on which Harold's entire defense will later swing. He will claim that Lucy shoved him first, that he stumbled into the baker's rack, that he grabbed the granite rolling pin purely by reflex, not intending to hurt her, just grabbing what was closest, acting on pure panic. He will claim that Lucy picked up a knife first, that she threatened him with it, that everything that came next was fear, was shock, was provocation, was not his fault. The sentencing judge will review every piece of evidence, every photograph, every forensic report, every witness statement. And he will say, quietly and precisely, that Harold's version of events had all the hallmarks of a narrative invented after the fact, because there is something Harold's story cannot explain, something no story about panic and provocation and momentary loss of control can ever explain. What comes next? Lucy ran, bleeding, staggering, already seriously injured from the rolling pin that struck her head. She found the door. She got out of that house and into the February night, and she ran, across the grounds, toward the lights of the neighboring houses, screaming, both hands on glass, "Please, help me, please, open the door, please." A neighbor heard her, came outside, found her near the hedge by the driveway, found her still breathing, still fighting, still here. But Harold had followed her out of that house. He had not stopped. He had not stood in the kitchen and looked at what he'd done. He had not called for help. He had not sat down. He had followed her, with a knife, across those dark grounds, past the hedges, to where she was. And he stabbed Lucy Landry 23 times. The sentencing judge noted, in the measured, careful language of an English courtroom that somehow makes everything it describes more devastating rather than less, that many of those wounds were inflicted while Lucy was already on the ground, while she was on her back, while she was using her own arms to try to cover her face, while she was trying, with everything she had left, to survive. When the paramedics arrived and found her in the dark, the knife was still in her body. James was 14 years old. Harriet was 7 years old. They were asleep inside the house, and they did not yet know. West Mercia police received the call at 11:45 p.m. Before Harold Landry steps out into that lane to wait, he makes one stop. He gets into his car. He drives to the cottage of the woman he had been seeing during the months of separation. He knocks on her door at nearly midnight. She opens it. He tells her something terrible has happened. And then, carefully, deliberately, with the focused composure of a man who has thought about this moment, he places into her hands 3 bankers' drafts, £30,000, a bundle of cash, his car keys, signed blank checks. Let me say that number again, £30,000, transferred within minutes of leaving Lucy bleeding in the dark on her own driveway. Then Harold walks away, out into the lane, into the cold, into the quiet. A police sergeant finds him just before midnight, walking alone. No sign of distress, no collapse, no shaking hands, calm, compliant, almost serene. I need you to sit with that image, because it is the most revealing moment of this entire case. Not the attack, not the trial, not the sentencing. This moment, a man walking calmly down a country lane after stabbing his wife 23 times. Having just transferred £30,000, having just handed over his car keys and his signed checks like someone settling an estate before a long trip, walking in the February cold in the same quiet way that he did everything, with the absolute conviction that he was the one who had been wronged, that he was the real victim in this, that the world would come to understand his side of it if he just held his nerve. Having just handed away £30,000, calm. Because that is not a man who snapped. That is not a man who lost control in a white-hot moment he now can't even remember. That is a man who made a decision and then immediately started managing what came after it. Harold Landry is arrested just before midnight, charged with murder on February 4, 2010, Wolverhampton Crown Court, February 2011. 7 days of evidence. The defense has no viable path on the facts themselves. Harold killed Lucy. The physical evidence, the forensic reports, the wounds, the weapon, the witnesses. There is no version of events where that is not true. So the defense argues manslaughter by provocation, that Lucy had been humiliating Harold for months, that the separation had been an extended psychological torment, that she shoved him first, that she picked up the knife first, that any ordinary man, pushed to the limit, living under the same roof as a woman who had already emotionally left the marriage, might have broken. Harold takes the stand the day before his 65th birthday. He cries. Real tears, maybe. I don't know what's real inside Harold Landry, and I don't think Harold does either. He says he loved her. He says the marriage falling apart destroyed him. He says he cannot remember the stabbing, that it is gone from him. A blank. And he is, sitting in that witness box, wiping his eyes, one day before his birthday, the real victim. One final time. The real victim. The prosecution, led by Rachel Brand QC, shows the jury a courtroom animation, not photographs, not diagrams, a visual reconstruction of the attack, where Lucy ran, how far she made it across those grounds, where Harold followed her, the distance between the door and where she fell, the number of wounds delivered while she was already down. You cannot watch that animation and believe this was passion. You cannot watch it and believe this was a snap. 23 stab wounds while a woman is on her back trying to shield her own face is not a breakdown, is not a moment, is a decision made and remade 23 times. The jury deliberates for 3 hours and 52 minutes, guilty of murder, and only then, only after that verdict has been delivered, only after the jury have done their job, are they told what England never knew, that in 1994 in Louisiana, Harold Landry was convicted of shooting a man in the neck. Chris Price, a traffic light, a .38 caliber handgun, A man who walked free with probation and a $500 fine and the unshakable belief that he had been the real victim. Same logic, same framing, same story, told 16 years apart in 2 different countries to 2 different juries. I was provoked. I was the victim. I had no choice. The first time it worked. Justice Foskett sentences Harold Landry to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. He calls the attack unspeakable. He says he has no doubt Harold intended to kill her. And then he says the line that stays with me. The one I keep turning over in the dark. There is a trait within you that, if provoked and challenged, can lead to serious violence. Not an incident, not a terrible night, not a man who lost control once. A trait. Something built into the architecture of who he is. Something that was there in Louisiana in 1994. Something that was there in Worcestershire in 2010. Something that, had Lucy known, had the system had any mechanism to tell her, might have saved her life. Lucy Davies named herself misery when she was 28 years old and alone and brave enough to be honest about it. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't performing sadness for an audience. She was just telling the truth about where she was and holding out quietly for something better. She found Harold Landry. She spent 10 years building a life inside a house that looked from every angle like the life you'd want. The estate, the stone walls, the daughter, the stepson growing up, the holidays, the image. And she carried, for years, the weight of knowing that something inside that image was wrong. Something that couldn't be photographed. Something the neighbors could almost hear through the walls at night if they stood still enough. And then, after 10 years, she did the thing, the hardest thing. The thing that takes more courage than most of us will ever be tested on. She chose herself. She hired the lawyer. She fought for fair terms. She refused to go quietly. She posted 7 words on a Monday night because she was done pretending, done swallowing, done being the version of herself that Harold required her to be. She did everything right. What she could not have known. What no one told her. What the British court system had no mechanism to tell her. What existed only in a Louisiana courthouse record that nobody thought to look for. Was that the man she was trying to leave had already stood over another human being and pulled the trigger. Had already looked a courtroom full of people in the eye and said he was the victim. Had already walked free. Had already crossed an ocean and rebuilt himself from scratch and found another woman to orbit around and was now faced with losing her, doing what he had always done, refusing. If she had known about Chris Price, would she have left differently? Would she have gone to the police before that night? Would she have had someone with her? Would she have been somewhere else entirely on the night of February 1st, 2010? I don't know. None of us will ever know. What I know is this. 2 children grew up without their mother. James, who was 14 that night, who was inside that house, who heard God knows what and understood God knows how much. And Harriet, 7 years old, who woke up on February 2nd, 2010, and the world she had known was gone. What I know is that Harold Landry built 2 lives, a Louisiana life and an English life, and burned both of them down because he could not tolerate the thought of anyone walking away from him. What I know is that somewhere in Louisiana, Chris Price has a scar on his neck and a story that most people have never heard. And what I know is that the system that was supposed to protect Lucy couldn't protect her from a history it didn't know existed. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with. That is not a lesson with a clean ending. That is just the truth. Lucy Landry, mother, musician, the woman who named herself Misery and deserved so much more than the story she was given. The woman who fought, even at the end, even in the dark, even with nothing left, who ran and screamed and banged on windows because she was not ready to stop, because she had children inside that house, because she had a future she was building, because she had every right to be alive. She is not forgotten, not here, not by us, not ever. If this story reached you, share it, drop a comment. Tell me which moment stopped you cold. Tell me which part of this you're still thinking about. Subscribe. New case every single week. We don't let them disappear. We never let them disappear.